Well, friends, I often speak of myself on the air as a dark, brooding, melancholic Irishman with an apocalyptic imagination. So it may puzzle you to see that today's episode is entitled Hopeful Signs, and you may be relieved to know that it's really me, and I haven't changed, because it's Hopeful Signs with a question mark. There may be some good news out on the horizon, but I don't want to rush to judgment. To help me walk through that, a returning guest of the show, someone I respect very much as a friend of the show, a friend of the Lord, and one of the most honest and charitable men I've ever met in Catholic media. He's the president of the Lepanto Institute. Michael Hichborn, welcome back to the Catholic Current.
Thank you so much, Father, and thank you very much for your kind words. I hope to live up to them.
Michael, you know that people need some kind of good news, and yes, so let's do that. We also don't want to indulge in wishful thinking, because that can, in the long run, make things worse. We know that there was a few years ago a rather painful and embarrassing survey about Catholics and their understanding of the Eucharist, and while acknowledging that only about 23% of the baptized go to Sunday Mass regularly, only about 2/3 believe in the real presence, and there was a lot of fussing and moving back and forth. There was recently a survey that said, well, it might not be so bad after all. And I talked with Father Peter Stravinskas about some of the flaws in the design of that. You've looked at those surveys, and I know that you and Tim Flanders had a discussion on your YouTube channel recently about a survey at laysurvey.com. Can you fill us in, please, on the battle of the surveys?
Sure. So the problem with conducting any survey is that the nature of the questions or the flow of the questions can influence the responses that are given. The other problem with surveys is that in approaching somebody to take a survey, there are certain assumptions that have to be made. The individual willing to give a survey typically tends to be somebody of an older generation, as younger people don't like taking surveys, which will skew your results. So you're not entirely sure what the real cross-section looks like, even when you have the results of your particular survey. So that's the first problem, just in the matter of statistics itself. But the other problem is that with any survey, when people respond and they're answering the questions, the previous surveys for the Eucharist, for instance, there were certain questions that weren't asked regarding why someone doesn't believe or does believe in the true presence of Christ, or what influencing factors there are that have helped them to either strengthen their understanding of the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, or that have weakened them. What changes have been made over the last several decades within the Church that may have influenced those thoughts. So the reason for the new survey, the one that is being proffered by the Real Presence Coalition at laysurvey.com, the reason for this is to try and fill those gaps and to give a broader and more complete set of data for the bishops to use in understanding the crisis that we're in.
All right. So what we have here is, we need to know the truth. And one of the reasons that I think that the truth isn't very good at the moment is that our churches are largely emptying out. There are certainly more funerals than baptisms at very many churches. So it seems to me that some people may be kind of clutching at straws for the sense of a false reassurance. So, what are really the merits of your approach to this particular survey? Is it the broader range of questions or the greater specificity?
It's the greater specificity because we do have a broad coalition, and the hope is that we can reach a broader audience with these survey questions. But it's the specificity within the questions that I think really is the driving factor here.
Okay, all right. So, do you have a cutoff for the survey? Do you have a sense of what you want to do with the results? Who you'd share it with?
Well, once the the survey will continue to go on up until around or shortly before the big Eucharistic Congress in Indianapolis towards the end of July. Mm-hmm. And the hope is that we can have data to present to the bishops as they meet and mm-hmm. discuss the true presence of Christ and how it is that they can better inculcate that idea that Christ is truly indeed present in the Holy Eucharist, and what that means for the individual and how that impacts us in our daily lives and in our spiritual lives.
I can't help but think of McTeige's axiom, which states, most institutions would rather die than admit that anyone ever made a mistake. If we have to talk about things that need to be corrected or things that we can do better, isn't that an implicit admission that some things may have gone wrong? Are you confident that the bishops as a body will admit that, maybe we've been going in the wrong direction or at a 45-degree angle for years, if not decades?
Well, why don't we go all the way back to Corinthians? It was in the 11th chapter of the first book of Corinthians where St. Paul said, he that eateth and drinketh unworthily eateth and drinketh judgment to himself, not discerning the body of the Lord. He wouldn't say that unless there wasn't already a problem. In fact, he makes it clear that there was a problem because he says, this is why many of you are sick and many of you are suffering. It's because you are not discerning the body and blood of Christ in the Eucharist. And it's fairly evident throughout the history of the Church that this is something that has to be revisited and reinvigorated within the body of the Church so that we don't have people with a false idea of what's going on with the Eucharist and how to prepare for it. If you read St. Paul's words very clearly, he says not just about eating and drinking unworthily, but it starts with discerning the body of the Lord. In other words, you have to know and recognize who it is that is in the Eucharist, right. And then that will inform you properly on how to eat and drink worthily. So I really don't understand how this Congress in Indianapolis can take place without also talking about the absolute necessity of increasing the use and frequenting the use of the sacrament of penance.
Well, you're opening up quite a can of worms there, Michael. That can become kind of a hard sell. If the Mass were emphasized, especially as a sacrifice for sin, if we emphasize the idea that we were joining Our Lady and St. John at the foot of the cross as the sacrifice of Calvary was made present again, then it would be rather obvious that, gosh, the Church takes sin very seriously, rightly so. I need to step up and do likewise. That would be an easier sell. But if you pitch it as primarily Happy Meal, and we get together and celebrate us in all of our usness, then it becomes kind of a buzzkill to mention communion. And also, when St. Paul was talking about people not discerning the presence of the body and blood of the Lord, he was not talking about people who are financially dependent upon the largesse of Caesar. And if you have to start denying Holy Communion to the politicians who are writing the checks that enable your diocese to perform the corporal works of mercy, there might be, dare I say it, a conflict of interest. And I could easily imagine someone looking for some kind of excuse for explaining why Canon 915 doesn't apply. And I think that we have let our communities, our parishes collapse to the point where the only way to justify the existence of the diocesan bureaucracy is by outsourcing the corporal works of mercy to state finances. And that denying Holy Communion to those Catholic politicians who write the checks might be seen as biting the hand that feeds you. And unless and until we're going to have that conversation, I don't know how we're going to make progress. And maybe maybe I was wrong, and there's someone from a chancery office out there who wants to contact the show and say, let me tell you why Father is wrong, you can contact us at thestationofthecross.com/askfather. I'm Jesuit Father Robert McTeigue, your host here every day at the Catholic Current. Just a reminder, mark your calendar, August 24th. We are having the 25th anniversary celebration of the Station of the Cross on the air. We want you there. You can register at thestationofthecross.com/25. Remember, our rallying cry here at the Catholic Current is Christus Mundo, Mundus Christo, bringing Christ to the world and the world to Christ. We do it because our Lord says so, for the greater glory of God, the love of our neighbor, and the salvation of our own soul. Take us to your family and friends. Together we'll take it to the whole world. Back in just 2 minutes. Please do stay with us.